No one in the Vexel system expected the human to survive. Not the bookmakers. Not the race officials. Not the 9 alien champions waiting on the starting grid. In fact, most of them had already placed bets on which lap the human pilot would die. Because the Vexel Circuit did not destroy ships. It destroyed pilots. Because the Vexel Circuit had a reputation across the galaxy. Ships didn't lose that race. Pilots died in it. No one expected that ship to survive the first lap. The alien pilots approached the race like every other competition in the galaxy. To them, the human pilot wasn't a serious competitor. Humans had a reputation across the outer systems. Impulsive, risk-obsessed, and notoriously bad at self-preservation, which made the human pilot perfect entertainment. Optimize speed. Avoid risk. Fly the safe paths. The human pilot followed a very different philosophy. If the safest path exists, then every intelligent species will take it, which means the safest path is also the most predictable one. And predictable pilots are easy to defeat. If the safest path exists, then everyone else will use it. By the final lap, something strange had happened. The alien champions were still racing each other, but the human pilot was racing the system itself. But when the race finally ended, every sensor in the system showed the same impossible result. And when investigators finished reconstructing the entire flight path, the room went silent, because what the sensors revealed was impossible. The human ship had not followed the official race path. It had cut through sectors that every navigation system in the galaxy automatically flags as fatal. They realized something that terrified the Racing Federation. The human had not just survived the Vexel Circuit. The human had mapped it, using flight paths that no alien pilot had ever considered survivable. First place, human pilot. And when the analysts replayed the telemetry, at first they assumed the sensors were malfunctioning because the flight path the human ship had taken wasn't listed in the official course maps. No sane pilot would fly through those sectors. The gravitational stress alone should have torn the ship apart. They realized something even more disturbing. The human hadn't won by being faster. The human had won by understanding something the alien pilots did not. Every species in the Vexel system optimized their flight algorithms for survival. Humans optimized theirs for victory. And sometimes, those are very different things. The human had won by flying through parts of a course that every other species considered suicidal. And that discovery created a question no one in the Vexel system could answer. Why would a human pilot deliberately choose the most lethal paths in the entire circuit? The answer shocked the entire Racing Federation, because the human pilot had not discovered those lethal routes during the race. The human had studied them before the competition even began. While alien pilots trained in safe simulations, the human pilot trained inside the dangerous zones themselves. To a human pilot, those impossible sectors were simply the fastest way through the storm. The answer would only become clear hours later, when investigators reconstructed the full flight path. Across the known galaxy, competitions exist everywhere. There are combat arenas where warriors test strength and reflexes. There are strategic tournaments where entire civilizations measure intelligence and planning. There are military flight duels where elite pilots demonstrate their superiority in controlled engagements. But among all of them, only one event ever earned a reputation that spread across hundreds of star systems. Because the pilots who entered the Vexel Circuit didn't just risk losing. They risked disappearing. And the human pilot who registered for the race knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. And every pilot who entered it knew the same thing. The Vexel Circuit didn't forgive mistakes. And it didn't forgive arrogance, which made the human entry deeply confusing to everyone watching. A race known not for the glory of its champions, but for the number of pilots who never returned from it. That race took place inside the Vexel system, a distant solar system orbiting an aging star located far from the primary commercial routes of the galaxy. For thousands of years, the Vexel system had been ignored, which raised another disturbing question. If the system was so unstable, how had the human pilot already studied it in such detail? No habitable worlds, no colonies, no trade routes, just gravitational chaos and drifting asteroid rivers, which made it perfect for one thing: a race no sane pilot would enter. Only a chaotic arrangement of celestial bodies trapped in unstable gravitational patterns. Asteroid clusters drifted through space in unpredictable rivers of debris. Fragments of shattered moons orbited at constantly shifting distances. Gravitational distortions rippled through the system like invisible storms. For most navigators, the entire region was considered dangerously unstable. For racers, it eventually became something else. It became the perfect proving ground. At some point in the distant past, a small group of reckless pilots had attempted something absurd. They tried to race through the system. Not around it, not safely above its hazards. Directly through them. The original attempt ended badly. Several ships never returned. But the few survivors brought back stories that spread quickly through the underworld of explorers, smugglers, and mercenaries. Stories of impossible maneuvers, of navigating through violent asteroid corridors, of threading ships between collapsing gravitational pockets. Those stories ignited something dangerous in the minds of ambitious pilots across the galaxy. Soon, more ships began arriving in Vexel, each attempting to push deeper through the system's hazards, each trying to chart a faster path than the last. Eventually, the experiment turned into an organized event. The Vexel Circuit was born. Unlike most racing tracks, the circuit was never constructed. It was defined by the system itself. The course forced pilots through a sequence of natural disasters disguised as a racetrack. The first section spiraled through a dense asteroid river orbiting the system's inner gravity well. The second required ships to pass between drifting fragments of a shattered moon, each piece moving in unstable orbital patterns. The third segment forced racers dangerously close to a massive brown dwarf star whose gravitational pull distorted navigation systems. The entire route demanded 3 full laps, each one lasting nearly 40 minutes under perfect conditions. No autopilot could survive there. Artificial intelligence systems struggled to process the constantly shifting gravitational forces. Every second required human or alien instinct, pure reaction, absolute control. At first, very few pilots dared to attempt it, but the ones who succeeded gained something priceless. Reputation. Victory in the Vexel Circuit quickly became one of the most respected achievements in all of spaceflight. Soon the event attracted competitors from across the galaxy. Species known for superior reflexes. Pilots famous for surviving impossible environments. Veterans of military campaigns and deep space expeditions. Over time, the race transformed into a spectacle watched across hundreds of star systems. Observation platforms appeared at the outer edge of the system. Massive broadcast satellites captured every moment. Betting networks processed astronomical wagers on each new competition. The rules remained brutally simple. Each race allowed only 10 pilots. No qualifiers. No amateur participants. Every competitor had to already be legendary in some field of spaceflight. And once the race began, there were no safety systems inside the course. No rescue guarantees. No intervention if a ship was destroyed within the circuit. The race continued without interruption, because in Vexel, survival alone already meant victory over the system itself. And in that particular year's race, something unusual appeared in the list of invited competitors. 9 names were exactly what everyone expected. Elite pilots, dangerous species, veterans of extreme racing environments. But the 10th name stood out in a very different way. It belonged to a pilot from a civilization that had only recently begun exploring the larger galactic stage. A species still considered young compared to the ancient starfaring empires. A species rarely associated with extreme flight competitions. The final competitor invited to the deadliest race in the galaxy was human. Across the galaxy, the reaction was almost identical. The race had 9 serious contenders, and one participant who would most likely disappear before completing even the first lap. By the time race day arrived, the Vexel system was surrounded by spectators. Observation stations floated along stable outer orbits. Thousands of private ships formed distant viewing rings around the system. Broadcast drones filled the surrounding space, capturing every possible angle of the circuit. Across the galaxy, entire planets tuned in to watch, because the Vexel Circuit had evolved into something more than a race. It had become a test of the most dangerous pilots alive. The first competitors began arriving through hyperspace, their vessels appearing one by one in the staging zone near the starting beacon. Each ship represented a species known for extraordinary capabilities. One of the first arrivals belonged to the Vorthri, a race famous for neural processing speeds that far exceeded the galactic average. Their nervous systems could analyze visual information at incredible rates, giving their pilots reaction times that most species could never match. Their representative in the race was Kraithval, a veteran champion from multiple high-risk combat flight tournaments. His vessel was built entirely around acceleration and aggressive maneuvering. Long, narrow, and razor-thin, the ship resembled a weapon more than a racer. Soon after came a vessel from the Dravik collective. Unlike most species, the Dravik possessed distributed neural architecture that allowed them to process enormous volumes of data simultaneously. Their pilots did not simply control their ships. They integrated directly with them. Sensors, thrusters, shields, and navigation systems became extensions of the pilot's biological processing network. The Dravik competitor entered the race with a ship that functioned almost like a living organism reacting to the environment around it. Next arrived a pilot from the Ketheri, a predatory species evolved in one of the most hostile planetary systems ever discovered. Their homeworld was surrounded by unstable orbital debris and violent electromagnetic storms. Survival in such an environment had forced the species to develop exceptional spatial awareness and instinctive navigation abilities. Their racing vessel reflected those traits. Compact, angular, and capable of abrupt directional shifts that would tear apart conventional ships. More competitors followed. A pilot from the Turvax, a species known for subconscious probability prediction. A mercenary champion from the Orvani systems, famous for experimental gravitational stabilizers. Several other elite racers representing distant regions of the galaxy. Every participant was already known as one of the best pilots in existence. Each had survived environments that would destroy ordinary ships within seconds. Each had proven their superiority through years of impossible achievements. Together, they formed a lineup that many analysts considered the most dangerous collection of pilots ever assembled in one race. Yet despite the overwhelming expertise gathered in the staging formation, attention across the broadcast networks remained fixed on one detail. The final arrival had not yet appeared. The human pilot. Speculation spread across the viewing platforms and data channels. Humanity had only recently expanded beyond its home system. Compared to the ancient civilizations dominating galactic travel, their presence was still relatively new. Their ships were competent but rarely specialized. Their pilots had not yet established strong reputations in extreme racing environments. When the final vessel finally emerged from hyperspace and drifted into the staging zone, it immediately appeared different from the others. Smaller, simpler, less aggressive in design. The hull markings identified the ship as the ARC 47 Horizon. The pilot inside the vessel was a human named Daniel Hayes. Most analysts barely reacted to the name. Human pilots had almost no history in extreme racing circuits, but a few observers studying the entry logs noticed something unusual. Daniel Hayes had not entered the race randomly. He had specifically requested the Vexel Circuit. Across the observation platforms, predictive models began calculating survival probabilities. The numbers were not encouraging. Simulations consistently placed the human pilot at the bottom of every possible outcome. Many projections suggested the vessel would be eliminated within the first section of the course. Among the elite competitors gathered in the starting formation, the human ship attracted little attention. The race already seemed decided. 9 legendary pilots, and one newcomer unlikely to last long enough to matter. But there was one variable the predictions could not properly measure. Human competitive behavior had always been difficult for other species to quantify, especially in situations where the challenge appeared impossible. If you enjoy stories where humanity surprises the entire galaxy, consider subscribing to the channel. Because what happened in the Vexel Circuit that day changed the way alien pilots looked at humans forever. Inside the cockpit of the ARC 47 Horizon, the atmosphere was calm and controlled. Navigation systems projected the constantly shifting layout of the Vexel Circuit across the central display. Streams of telemetry data flowed through multiple layers of diagnostic monitoring. Gravitational fluctuations updated in real time. Asteroid trajectories shifted across the holographic map like slow-moving currents. The race course extended across the entire inner region of the Vexel system. 3 complete laps, each one passing through environments that pushed the limits of both ship design and pilot reflexes. The first segment alone would eliminate many competitors. A dense asteroid corridor spiraled around the system's central gravity well. Millions of fragments moved through the region at unpredictable velocities. Some pieces were small enough to barely register on scanners. Others were large enough to destroy a racing vessel instantly on impact. Their paths constantly shifted due to minor gravitational disturbances. Any pilot entering the field would have to react instantly to hundreds of moving obstacles. Most alien competitors relied heavily on advanced automation during such conditions. Predictive navigation software. neural-linked stabilization systems, adaptive AI that could calculate multiple escape paths at once. The Horizon possessed many of those systems as well, but the human pilot had configured the ship differently. Manual control systems remained fully active. Flight adjustments were still routed through physical control interfaces rather than complete automation. This approach was considered inefficient by many alien engineering standards, but it allowed something machines struggled to replicate: improvisation. The Horizon systems continued processing navigation data as the starting formation stabilized outside the ship. 9 other racing vessels waited in alignment near the ignition beacon. Each represented decades of experience and technological refinement. Each was commanded by a pilot widely recognized as elite. Across the galaxy, viewers focused their attention on the famous competitors. Very little analysis focused on the human ship positioned quietly at the edge of the formation. Statistical models continued updating their predictions. Most outcomes ended with the human vessel failing before completing the first lap. A few projections extended slightly longer. None predicted victory, but statistical predictions had never been particularly effective when analyzing human decision-making in extreme environments. Inside the Horizon, the pilot continued studying the course, not as a fixed route, but as a constantly evolving puzzle. Asteroid clusters formed temporary corridors that would only exist for a few seconds. Gravitational distortions occasionally opened narrow acceleration lanes through the debris fields. Dangerous opportunities appeared and vanished in moments. For most pilots, those conditions represented hazards. For a human pilot accustomed to chaotic environments, they represented possibilities. Outside the ship, the starting beacon activated. A bright sphere of energy ignited between the 10 competitors. Across the system, the race countdown began transmitting through every broadcast channel. Thruster systems across the lineup powered up simultaneously. Energy signatures intensified as the competitors prepared to launch. Within seconds, the race would begin. The safest route through the first asteroid corridor had already been calculated by most of the competitors. Predictive models pointed toward a stable entry path along the outer edge of the debris flow. 9 elite pilots prepared to accelerate toward that corridor. For most competitors, the opening minutes of the Vexel Circuit were about survival. Establish a stable route. Avoid unnecessary risks. Let weaker pilots eliminate themselves. But the human pilot had already chosen a completely different approach. But inside the Horizon, a different trajectory had already been selected. A path that cut directly through the most unstable region of the asteroid river. A route no predictive model considered efficient or survivable. When the starting beacon detonated in a flash of light, 10 ships surged forward into the opening section of the Vexel Circuit. 9 of them accelerated toward the safest calculated entry point. The 10th ship moved in a completely different direction, straight toward the most chaotic region of the entire asteroid field, because the human pilot had already identified something the others had ignored. Inside that chaos, there existed a shortcut capable of skipping nearly half the first lap. The instant the starting beacon detonated, the Vexel system erupted into motion. 10 racing vessels ignited their engines simultaneously, accelerating into the first segment of the circuit. 9 of them followed the same calculated path. Predictive models had already identified the safest entry point into the asteroid corridor spiraling around the system's inner gravity well. That route allowed enough space between debris clusters to maintain speed while minimizing collision risk. For most pilots, survival in the opening minutes of a race depended on discipline. Entering the asteroid river too aggressively often ended in catastrophic destruction. Even the most experienced racers respected that reality. The human ship did not. While the other competitors surged toward the outer corridor of the asteroid field, the ARC-47 Horizon veered sharply away from the formation. Instead of approaching the stable edge of the debris stream, the vessel accelerated directly toward the densest region of the field. The decision immediately confused the tracking algorithms monitoring the race. Sensors began recalculating trajectory projections as the human ship crossed into an area considered statistically suicidal. The asteroid river in that region behaved less like a field of drifting rocks and more like a violent current. Massive fragments rotated through space in chaotic spirals. Smaller debris shot between them at unpredictable velocities. Gravitational distortions from nearby bodies constantly altered their paths. Within seconds, the Horizon disappeared into that storm of moving stone and metal. From the perspective of distant observation platforms, the maneuver appeared reckless. Most simulations predicted immediate destruction. But inside the asteroid river, something very different began happening. Instead of colliding with the debris, the horizon moved through it with abrupt, fluid adjustments. Short bursts from maneuvering thrusters nudged the ship through narrow gaps that existed for only fractions of a second. The vessel rolled sideways to slip between rotating fragments that would have destroyed a slower craft. Momentum carried it forward along a path that no predictive navigation system had considered viable. Rather than fighting the chaotic movement of the asteroid current, the human pilot used it. Each drifting fragment created momentary openings deeper inside the debris stream. Those openings formed a temporary corridor that twisted through the interior of the field. A corridor that existed only for pilots capable of reacting instantly to shifting trajectories. The horizon followed that path. Deeper, faster, more aggressively with every passing second. Outside the field, the other 9 competitors continued racing along the safer corridor near the edge of the debris stream. Their vessels maintained impressive speed while weaving through the outer layers of the asteroid river. But even the fastest of them could not ignore what the sensors were reporting. The human vessel was no longer behind them. It was moving through the center of the field, and its velocity was increasing. Tracking systems struggled to maintain a stable lock on the horizon as it slipped through rotating clusters of rock. Broadcast drones repositioned themselves to capture the impossible maneuver from different angles. Across the galaxy, viewers began noticing the anomaly. At first, it appeared to be a mistake in the telemetry, a glitch in the broadcast. But the data remained consistent. The human ship was traveling along a trajectory that effectively cut across the entire interior of the asteroid river. While the other competitors followed the long curve of the outer corridor, the horizon carved a direct line through the center. The difference in distance was enormous. By the time the leading alien racers emerged from the asteroid corridor's midpoint, the human vessel had already crossed far deeper into the field than any competitor had ever attempted. Fragments of shattered moons spun violently around the racing ship. Several pieces passed close enough to scrape the outer hull plating. Shock waves rippled through the debris current as the horizon blasted through another narrow opening. Each maneuver demanded perfect timing. Each adjustment required instant recognition of changing trajectories. But the ship never slowed. Instead, it accelerated. Gravity from the system's central well began pulling the entire asteroid river inward. The debris flow tightened, increasing the speed of everything trapped inside it. For most pilots, that phenomenon represented the most dangerous moment of the first lap. For the horizon, it became an opportunity. The ship angled slightly downward, allowing the gravitational pull to drag it deeper into the current. Instead of resisting the acceleration, the human pilot used it like a slingshot. The horizon surged forward with explosive speed. Within moments, it burst out of the asteroid river entirely, emerging ahead of several competitors who had taken the safer route. Sensors across the circuit recalculated the race standings. The results stunned the monitoring systems. The human pilot had effectively skipped nearly half of the first segment, and for the first time since the race began. The ARC 47 Horizon was no longer in last place. It was rapidly approaching the middle of the pack. Across the broadcast networks, the reaction spread quickly. Attention shifted. Cameras that had previously ignored the human vessel suddenly redirected their focus. Because the maneuver inside the asteroid river had demonstrated something unexpected. The human pilot was not simply surviving the race. The human pilot was hunting shortcuts inside the most dangerous environment in the system. And the Vexel Circuit had only just begun. Ahead of the asteroid river waited the second segment of the course. A drifting graveyard of fractured moons whose unstable orbits created a constantly collapsing maze of stone. A section where even the greatest pilots in the galaxy slowed down. But the horizon was not slowing. It was accelerating toward the next hazard, as if the race had only just started. By the time the ARC 47 Horizon exited the asteroid river, the race had already begun to fragment. The initial formation of 10 ships had dissolved into scattered trajectories as each pilot attempted to maximize speed through the chaotic environment. Some vessels remained close together along the outer edge of the asteroid corridor. Others had already begun pushing deeper into the circuit. But one fact was now impossible to ignore. The human ship had not been eliminated. Instead, it had gained ground. Tracking systems across the Vexel broadcast network recalculated the standings repeatedly as new telemetry data arrived. The results remained consistent. The horizon had advanced from last position to the middle of the race within the first section of the circuit. More importantly, it had done so using a path that none of the other competitors had attempted. Inside the cockpits of the alien racers, sensor feeds continued monitoring the positions of nearby vessels. Each pilot was aware of the others through tactical displays constantly updating relative distance and velocity. For the first time since the race began, several of those displays registered something unexpected. The human vessel was no longer a distant blip trailing behind the pack. It was approaching, rapidly. Ahead of them, the second segment of the Vexel Circuit loomed across the darkness of space. The Shattered Crown, a graveyard of broken moons orbiting the outer gravity bands of the system. Millions of years earlier, the Vexel system had contained a large planetary body in that region. Gravitational stress from the nearby brown dwarf had eventually torn it apart. What remained now was a vast cluster of drifting planetary fragments. Massive slabs of stone larger than entire cities. Jagged mountain ranges exposed directly to space. Fragments rotating slowly through unstable orbital patterns. Unlike the asteroid river, which moved like a chaotic current, the Shattered Crown behaved more like a collapsing labyrinth. Entire corridors opened and closed as massive fragments drifted past one another. Some passages existed for only a few minutes before disappearing. Others narrowed suddenly as rotating slabs shifted closer together. Any ship caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment could be crushed instantly. Even the most aggressive pilots respected the dangers of this section. Approaching vessels began reducing speed as they neared the outer edge of the fractured moon field. Predictive navigation systems activated across multiple ships, calculating safe routes through the shifting maze. Some pilots chose wide arcs around the largest fragments. Others aimed for narrow passages that offered faster routes but required perfect timing. Inside the human vessel, the horizon continued accelerating. Instead of slowing near the entrance of the Shattered Crown, the ship maintained high velocity as it approached the drifting labyrinth. Sensor arrays mapped the movement of the massive fragments ahead. Thousands of potential paths appeared across the navigation display. Most of them required careful, deliberate maneuvering. Only a few offered real acceleration opportunities. Those paths also carried the greatest risks. The horizon had just its trajectory, not toward the stable outer routes chosen by several alien racers, but toward a rapidly shifting cluster of rotating fragments deeper inside the field. That region of the Shattered Crown behaved unpredictably. 3 enormous slabs of planetary crust were orbiting each other in unstable alignment. Every few minutes their movement created a temporary corridor between them. For a brief moment, a ship could pass directly through the cluster. But the corridor collapsed quickly as the fragments continued rotating. Many pilots had attempted that path in previous races. Most had abandoned the attempt before reaching the entrance. The margin for error was almost non-existent. The horizon did not hesitate. As the massive fragments slowly rotated into alignment, the ship surged forward. Thrusters ignited with sharp bursts of acceleration. The vessel angled sharply downward, diving between 2 rotating slabs of stone that would soon close the opening behind it. Shock waves of displaced dust and debris erupted around the hull as the ship blasted through the narrow corridor. The entrance collapsed moments later as the fragments shifted again. From the perspective of the other racers, the maneuver appeared almost suicidal. Several vessels approaching the Shattered Crown registered the same telemetry data at nearly the same time. The human ship had entered the collapsing corridor and had not slowed down. Inside the labyrinth, the horizon threaded between rotating cliffs of shattered planetary crust. Some surfaces passed close enough to cast massive shadows across the racing vessel. Other fragments drifted across the flight path with only seconds of warning. Each maneuver required precise control of momentum. Instead of fighting the drifting mass of the broken moons, the ship used their gravitational influence to pivot around them. Acceleration bursts pushed the vessel through narrow passages that existed for only moments before closing again. The deeper the horizon moved into the cluster, the more dramatic the shortcut became. While the other competitors carefully navigated the outer edges of the labyrinth, the human vessel cut directly through its center. Distance vanished rapidly. Tracking systems across the broadcast network updated the race standings again. This time the shift was impossible to ignore. The human ship had just overtaken its first competitor. Then another. Within minutes, the ARC-47 horizon surged out of the Shattered Crown far ahead of several vessels that had previously been leading the race. Sensors recalculated the formation of the racers across the system. The new results spread quickly across the broadcast networks. The human pilot had entered the race as the least likely competitor to survive the first lap. Now the horizon was approaching the front half of the field. Across the galaxy, analysts began rerunning their simulations. New probability models attempted to incorporate the unexpected trajectory patterns demonstrated by the human vessel. The results remained unstable, because the algorithm struggled to predict the same factor that had already reshaped the race twice. Human pilots did not always follow the safest path. They followed the path that should not have worked. And far ahead in the circuit, the most dangerous section of the Vexel race was still waiting. A gravitational storm forming near the orbit of the system's brown dwarf. A region where space itself twisted under violent tidal forces. A place where even the most confident pilots slowed down. But the horizon continued accelerating toward it. And for the first time since the race began, the leaders of the Vexel Circuit had started watching the human ship. Beyond the shattered moons, the Vexel Circuit opened into a region of space that few pilots ever crossed willingly. The glow of the distant brown dwarf dominated the horizon. Its dull red light pulsed through the void like the dying heartbeat of a massive star. Around it, gravity did not behave normally. The intense mass of the failed star twisted spacetime into violent distortions that rippled through the surrounding system. Navigation charts labeled the region simply as the gravity storm. Unlike asteroid fields or drifting debris, the danger here could not always be seen. Gravitational currents flowed through space like invisible oceans. Some pushed ships away with gentle force. Others pulled with crushing intensity, capable of tearing vessels apart. Entire pockets of distorted space rotated slowly like cosmic whirlpools. Even the most advanced navigation systems struggled to predict the constantly shifting currents. For decades, experienced racers had learned a simple rule. Inside the gravity storm, speed could become a death sentence. Most ships approaching the region reduced thrust. Not dramatically, but enough to give their sensors time to react to sudden gravitational shifts. One by one, the leading vessels entered the outer edge of the storm. The sleek alien racers adjust their trajectories carefully. Thrusters pulsed in small corrections as they allowed the gravitational currents to guide them along stable paths. For a moment, the race slowed. Then the human ship arrived. The Arc 47 Horizon exited the shattered crown with enormous velocity still burning through its engines. Its hull glowed faintly from the friction of dust impacts gathered during the moon maze. Telemetry systems across the Vexel broadcast network registered its speed instantly. The horizon was approaching the gravity storm far faster than any other ship. Sensors aboard the alien vessels detected the incoming human craft immediately. Several tracking displays updated their warnings. A vessel traveling that fast could not adapt quickly enough to sudden gravitational distortions. Any miscalculation inside the storm could snap a ship's trajectory violently out of control. For a moment, analysts across the viewing networks assumed the same outcome. The human pilot had taken too many risks already. This would be where the race ended. But as the horizon crossed into the outer edge of the storm, something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting the gravitational distortions, the ship leaned into them. A powerful current surged outward from the brown dwarf, bending space like a stretched membrane. Most pilots avoided it. The horizon accelerated directly into it. For an instant, the vessel vanished from standard tracking paths as its trajectory bent violently along the gravitational wave. The current slingshot the ship sideways through space, flinging it across a massive section of the storm in seconds. Observers across the broadcast networks watched the telemetry spike. Velocity readings jumped beyond anything recorded by the other competitors. But the maneuver came with enormous danger. The slingshot pushed the horizon toward a collapsing gravity while forming near a rotating pocket of warped space. Inside that distortion, space twisted like a tightening spiral. A ship caught inside could be dragged inward until structural failure destroyed it. Every racing vessel nearby registered the warning. The human ship was on a collision course with the gravity well. Predictive models calculated the outcome quickly. There was no safe exit at the velocity the horizon was traveling. The probability of survival dropped below 2%. Across the race field, several alien pilots adjust their routes instinctively. Some even widened their distance from the incoming disaster zone. Inside the collapsing gravity spiral, the pull intensified. Fragments of rock and dust were already being dragged inward, forming a thin ring of debris around the distortion. The horizon continued straight toward it. For a moment, It appeared as if the human ship had finally made its fatal mistake. Then the engines ignited. Not in panic, not in desperation, but with precise timing. The Horizon fired its thrusters at the exact moment the gravitational spiral tightened. Instead of resisting the pull, the ship allowed the gravity well to capture part of its trajectory. The vessel curved sharply along the outer edge of the spiral. The maneuver used the distortion like a massive cosmic pivot point. The ship accelerated around the gravity well in a violent arc, then exploded out the opposite side with enormous speed. The slingshot effect multiplied the vessel's velocity beyond anything it had previously achieved. Sensors across the racing network recalculated its position again. The results sent a ripple through the monitoring systems. The Horizon had just passed 3 more competitors in less than 30 seconds. The human vessel was now among the leaders. Inside the gravity storm, the remaining racers began adjusting their tactics. The race had changed. Until now, the human had been treated as an unpredictable anomaly. But the telemetry data no longer supported that assumption. The Horizon was not surviving by luck. Its pilot was using the most dangerous features of the circuit as acceleration tools. Across the racing field, multiple alien sensor arrays locked directly onto the human ship. For the first time in the history of the Vexel Circuit, nearly every competitor in the race had begun tracking the same target. Not the leaders, not the veterans, the human. And deeper inside the gravity storm, a far larger distortion was beginning to form. A tidal collapse zone near the brown dwarf's inner orbit. A region where gravity could spike without warning. Even professional racers feared crossing it. But the Horizon was already moving toward it, still accelerating. Deep inside the gravity storm, space began to twist in ways that even the most advanced navigation systems struggled to interpret. The red glow of the brown dwarf filled half the visible horizon now. Its immense gravity churned the surrounding region into a violent ocean of warped space-time. Streams of gravitational force collided with each other like invisible hurricanes. Some pushed ships outward. Others pulled with sudden bursts of crushing intensity. But ahead of the racers waited the most dangerous formation in the entire Vexel Circuit, the tidal collapse zone, a region where the brown dwarf's gravity collided with the gravitational wake of several massive moon fragments drifting through unstable orbit. When those forces intersected, space-time folded violently. Temporary gravity spikes erupted without warning. Navigation computers across the racing vessels began issuing caution alerts as the racers approached the outer edge of the collapse zone. Predictive algorithms attempted to map safe passages through the unstable region, but the calculations changed every few seconds. Even the most experienced competitors reduced their speed significantly. Inside this zone, reaction time meant survival. The leading alien vessels began spreading out across different trajectories, searching for the safest possible path through the distortion. Thrusters pulsed gently. Tiny corrections adjust their approach vectors. For the first time since the race began, the front of the field was moving cautiously. Then the Arc 47 Horizon entered the collapse zone. The human ship still carried enormous velocity from its previous gravitational slingshot. Tracking systems updated instantly. The Horizon was now closing in on the top 3 racers. Inside the cockpits of the leading vessels, sensor alerts began to stack rapidly. Gravity distortions were appearing faster than predicted. Localized gravity spikes surged unpredictably through the collapse zone. One of the alien ships ahead encountered the first of them. Without warning, the ship's trajectory bent violently sideways as a sudden gravitational surge pulled it off course. The vessel fought the distortion, engines firing hard to stabilize its path. The maneuver slowed it significantly. Another competitor veered wide to avoid a forming gravity vortex. Precious seconds disappeared. Behind them, the human vessel approached the same region. The Horizon did not slow down. Instead, it accelerated again. Across the race monitoring networks, analysts struggled to understand the decision. The collapse zone was already unstable. Increased speed reduced reaction time dramatically. But the telemetry confirmed it. The human ship pushed deeper into the distortion field. Gravity spikes erupted around the vessel like invisible explosions. Massive invisible currents bent the surrounding space in violent waves. Each one had the potential to fling the ship out of control. Yet the Horizon began moving with the distortions. Instead of resisting them, the human pilot rode the gravitational surges like a surfer riding enormous waves. A spike erupted beneath the vessel. The ship tilted sharply as the surge lifted its trajectory upward through warped space. Another distortion slammed sideways through the region seconds later. The horizon adjusted its thrusters just enough to allow the gravitational wave to fling it forward. Velocity increased again. Across the race telemetry feeds, the data became almost impossible to believe. The human ship was turning the collapse zone itself into a propulsion system. Every gravitational surge that forced the other racers to slow down became an acceleration point for the horizon. Within moments, the ship closed the gap to the third-place vessel. A massive gravity spike erupted directly between the two ships. The alien vessel slowed instantly, avoiding the distortion. The horizon did not. The human ship dove directly through the edge of the spike. For a fraction of a second, the vessel disappeared from standard trajectory predictions. Then it burst out the opposite side of the distortion with a violent surge of speed. The tracking systems updated. The horizon had taken third place. Across the viewing networks of the Vexel system, billions of spectators watched the standings shift again. The human ship had started the race in last position. Now it was among the leaders. Inside the collapse zone, the remaining competitors began reacting differently. Until now, the human had been a curiosity, an unpredictable participant from a species with little racing history. But the telemetry data told a different story. The human pilot was not surviving the most dangerous parts of the circuit. The human pilot was dominating them. Ahead of the horizon, the two leading ships approached the final boundary of the gravity storm. Beyond it waited the last stretch of the Vexel Circuit, a long acceleration corridor leading directly back toward the Finnish beacon orbiting the outer ring of the system. Once a ship exited the storm, pure engine power would decide the winner. But as the horizon surged through the collapsing distortions behind them, the leaders began to realize something unsettling. The human ship was still accelerating, and the distance between them was shrinking. Rapidly, at the far edge of the gravity storm, space slowly began to stabilize. The violent distortions faded as the racers broke free from the tidal collapse zone. Ahead of them stretched the final section of the Vexel Circuit, the Helios Corridor, a massive acceleration lane carved between the outer gravitational rings of the system. It was the only section of the race where navigation skill mattered less than raw engine power. The path was almost perfectly clear. No drifting debris, no unstable gravity currents, no shifting asteroid fields, just open space. For most racers, the Helios Corridor was simple. Whoever entered it first usually won. The corridor extended for millions of kilometers directly toward the Finnish beacon orbiting the system's outer ring. Once a ship exited the gravity storm and entered that straight path, the pilot could unleash full engine power. The fastest ship would take the victory. Two vessels burst from the storm first. Both belonged to veteran alien racers whose species had dominated the Vexel Circuit for decades. Their ships were designed specifically for high-speed endurance racing. Long engine spines glowed bright as their propulsion systems surged to maximum output. Sensors across the system registered their acceleration immediately. The race leaders were now entering the final sprint. Moments later, a third vessel erupted out of the storm behind them. The Ark 47 Horizon. Dust from shattered moons still clung to its hull. Energy readings from its engines spiked sharply as it stabilized after the violent gravitational maneuvers. Tracking systems across the broadcast networks updated the standings again. Third place, but the distance between the three ships was shrinking rapidly. Inside the Helios Corridor, the two leading vessels ignited their engines fully. Long trails of blue-white plasma stretched behind them as they accelerated toward the Finnish beacon. Their advantage was clear. Both ships were built for sustained high-speed flight. The Horizon was not. The human vessel had spent most of the race performing violent maneuvering inside dangerous environments. Its frame was reinforced for agility, not pure speed. Across the analysis stations broadcasting the race, the predictions were immediate. Even after its astonishing performance inside the gravity storm, the human ship simply did not possess the raw engine output required to catch the leaders. The distance would continue growing. The race was effectively decided. Inside the corridor, the leaders pushed harder. Velocity indicators climbed steadily higher. Behind them, the horizon entered the straight path. For the first time since the race began, the environment offered no obvious shortcut. No gravitational currents to ride. No collapsing corridors to exploit. Only distance. Millions of kilometers of open space. The human ship accelerated. Its engines roared to maximum output. But the telemetry confirmed what analysts expected. The leaders were still faster. The gap widened slowly. Across the viewing networks, many spectators assumed the outcome was already sealed. The human had delivered an extraordinary performance. But the race would end the way it always had. Veteran alien racers crossing the finish line first. Then something changed. Inside the horizon, the engine output suddenly spiked far beyond its earlier readings. Sensors monitoring the ship across the broadcast network registered the surge instantly. Energy levels climbed sharply. Thruster plumes extended brighter and longer than before. The acceleration curve began rising rapidly. The gap between the horizon and the second-place ship stopped widening. Then it began shrinking. Across the monitoring stations, analysts scrambled to understand the data. The engine output of the human vessel had suddenly increased by nearly 40%. But the Horizon was not a military craft. It was a civilian racing vessel. Its engine systems should not have been capable of producing that much power without catastrophic overheating. Yet the telemetry confirmed it. The human ship was pushing far beyond its expected limits. Inside the Helios corridor, the two leaders began receiving the same tracking updates. A new velocity spike, approaching fast from behind. The horizon, closing the distance. The red glow of the brown dwarf faded behind them as the Finnish beacon appeared ahead. A massive ring of light floating against the darkness of space. The end of the Vexel Circuit. The leaders pushed their engines even harder. Plasma trails burned brighter behind their ships. But the gap continued shrinking. Across the broadcast network, the data became impossible to ignore. The human vessel was gaining speed faster than any other ship in the race. Not because its engines were stronger, but because it was pushing them past their intended limits. The horizon surged forward like a projectile. Within moments, it had nearly reached the second-place vessel. The final kilometers of the race were approaching. 3 ships now raced toward the Finnish beacon at impossible speed. And the human pilot was still accelerating. The Finnish beacon of the Vexel Circuit burned like a white star in the distance. 3 ships raced toward it at velocities that pushed the limits of their designs. 2 veteran alien racers in the lead. And behind them, closing with impossible speed, the Arc 47 Horizon. The Helios corridor had become a tunnel of pure acceleration. Engines screamed at maximum output as the vessels pushed forward through the vacuum. Telemetry systems across the broadcast networks struggled to keep up with the speed of the race leaders. The gap between the ships was now measured in seconds, then in fractions of seconds. The second-place vessel was the first to feel it. Its tracking display registered the rapidly approaching human ship. Velocity data updated again and again. Each update brought the horizon closer. The human vessel had already pushed its engines far beyond their intended limits. Thermal readings from a propulsion system were rising dangerously. Energy output fluctuated violently. Any further increase risked catastrophic engine failure. Across the analysis stations monitoring the race, the same conclusion appeared. The horizon could not push any harder. Its engines were already at the edge of destruction. Ahead, the Finnish beacon grew larger. The 2 leading ships surged forward with everything their propulsion systems could deliver. Their designs had been built for this moment. Long engine spines radiated heat into space as they maintained perfect stability at extreme velocity. Behind them, the horizon continued gaining. Slowly, but not fast enough. The remaining distance to the finish line was collapsing rapidly. If nothing changed within the next few seconds, the race would end. Inside the horizon, the engine output spiked again. Sensors across the Vexel broadcast network reacted instantly. A surge of energy rippled through the human ship. The acceleration curve changed dramatically. Output exceeded every known limit for the Arc 47 frame. Thermal readings jumped into catastrophic levels. Warning systems across the monitoring networks lit up simultaneously. The human vessel had just overridden its engine limiters. The horizon surged forward. The sudden acceleration slammed the ship through the vacuum like a projectile. The distance to the second-place vessel vanished in seconds. Across the corridor, gravity from the distant brown dwarf still tugged faintly at the edges of the racing lane. Most ships compensated carefully for the subtle pull. The horizon did the opposite. Its trajectory shifted slightly toward the gravitational edge of the corridor. The maneuver was subtle, but the effect was enormous. The faint gravitational pull curved the horizon's path just enough to create a final slingshot effect. The ship leaned into the gravity well for a fraction of a second. Then its engines fired again. The resulting acceleration spike pushed the vessel forward with terrifying speed. The horizon blasted past the second-place racer. Only one ship remained ahead, the leader of the Vexel Circuit, a vessel built by one of the fastest racing species in the known galaxy. Its engines were already burning at full output. It should have been impossible to catch, but the horizon was still accelerating. Heat from the human ship's engines flared brightly across the sensors monitoring the race. Structural stress warnings appeared across multiple telemetry feeds. The vessel was approaching the threshold of total engine failure. Across the broadcast networks, analysts realized what the human pilot had done. At first, the analysts assumed it was simply reckless flying, a series of desperate maneuvers that somehow worked. But when the navigation logs were reconstructed in full, a much stranger pattern began to appear. The horizon was no longer racing to protect its engines. It was racing to reach the finish line before they exploded. The final kilometers vanished in a blur of velocity. The leader held its course perfectly. The finish beacon loomed directly ahead. Then the horizon appeared beside it. Two ships now raced side by side toward the glowing ring of the Vexel finish marker. Engine plumes burned like miniature stars behind them. Velocity readings climbed past anything previously recorded in the circuit. The finish beacon filled the entire horizon. For a single moment, the two vessels remained perfectly aligned. Then the horizon surged forward one final time. The human ship crossed the finish line first. Across the Vexel system, race monitors froze for a fraction of a second. Then the final result appeared. First place, Arc 47 Horizon. The human vessel streaked past the beacon, its engines finally collapsing into emergency shutdown as the propulsion system overheated beyond safe limits. But the race was already finished. The horizon drifted forward in silence. Behind it, the other competitors crossed the line seconds later. Across the broadcast networks of the Vexel system, billions of spectators stared at the final standings. A human pilot had just won one of the most dangerous races in the galaxy. Not with the fastest ship, not with the most advanced technology, but with something the other racers had never fully understood. Humans did not measure risk the same way. Where other species saw danger, humans saw opportunity. Where others slowed down, humans pushed harder. And when their machines reached the absolute edge of failure, humans simply pushed them further. Because for humans, there was always one rule that mattered more than survival: winning. In the cycles that followed the race, the data from the Vexel Circuit was studied across dozens of star systems. Every maneuver performed by the Arc 47 Horizon was analyzed. Every gravitational slingshot, every impossible shortcut. But the investigators eventually discovered something even stranger. Many of the routes the human pilot had used were not random acts of desperation. They formed a pattern that mapped hidden gravitational corridors across the entire Vexel system, corridors that no exploration fleet had ever charted. Daniel Hayes had not just been racing through the system. He had been studying it. Every moment where the human pilot had pushed the ship past what the engineers believed was possible. Alien racing academies tried to replicate the strategy. Simulations were built. New navigation algorithms were written. But the results never matched what had happened that day. Because the calculations kept reaching the same problem. The human pilot had repeatedly chosen paths that no probability model recommended. Paths where survival rates dropped to almost zero. Paths where a single mistake meant destruction. And yet the human had taken them anyway. Across the galaxy, a quiet conclusion slowly formed among the racing guilds. Humans were not the most advanced pilots. They were not the most efficient navigators. But they possessed something far more dangerous. A willingness to push past the point where logic said to stop. A willingness to risk everything for victory. And ever since that race, whenever a new human pilot registered for the Vexel Circuit, the other competitors no longer laughed. They checked their sensors. They checked their engines. And they hoped that the human would choose a different race to enter. Because in the Vexel system, one lesson had become impossible to ignore. Never underestimate a species that is willing to break its own machines, just to cross the finish line first.